Welcome to the Sons of Mjolnir podcast.
The Sons of... what?
This isn't your Sons of Macaroni, yeah!
The Sons of Mjolnir?
This is Sons of Mjolnir, yeah, yeah!
Welcome back to another episode of the Sons of Mjolnir. As always, I am your host, Fat Thor, and today I am joined by a very special guest. You may know him as the writer of such titles as The Scarlet Witch, Silver Vessels, and the most recent title that he just put his name on is Scale Trade, coming from Magma Comix. I am joined today by the wonderful Steve Orlando. Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's good to be talking to you again.
Awesome. Yeah, if for all of our listeners and watchers that maybe not have caught the other episode me and Steve did together, you can go check that out over on Comic Corner from Agents of Fandom. We talk about Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. We go over his other book, Silver Vessels, coming from Mad Cave Comics. And you can also check out his other interview with my brother Damon over at Comic Corner to go over all of Steve's comic origin story and all that good stuff. So go check those out if you're interested. But today we are here to get down to business, Steve. We are here to talk about two awesome books that I absolutely love. First of all, being Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, which we talked a little bit about our last conversation. And I got to say, I just read issue 3 before hopping on here. And dude, you are killing it. Like, you killed it on the original Scarlet Witch. Now you're killing it on this. And before I get to my question, I just got to praise you for how great the book is and how excited I've been to pick up each issue when it comes out.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you picking it up, man. I mean, that's what we need. But that does not mean that it need go unsaid. So thank you for supporting it.
Of course, man. Of course. It's literally, I think we talked about this on our last conversation, but I've been obviously aware of Scarlet Witch, of Wanda. I've read a lot of stories with her, but I never actually read one of her solo series. So when I picked up your series, it just like blew me away and instantly became one of my favorite books that I'm picking up. So I feel like, for someone who's not really reading the character, for it to become my favorite book, that, says something for the creative team behind it. But besides praise, I got a couple questions for you about the series. Again, just because
Sure.
I've been loving it so much. So we talked about last time about sort of her powers and kind of writing someone that has almost unlimited power. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like you're taking a little bit of inspiration from a miniseries in the 90s from Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning. Is that fair to say?
For the miniseries for Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver and for the solo to come, absolutely. And it's not just that. You'll see some references to some of the minis she was co-starring in the 80s as well, and you'll see some references to stuff from the previous solo run from the 2010s as well. But yes, like, we are sort of focusing in on some of the lore that was from the Abnett miniseries as sort of our focal point, as you noted, for Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. And that's going to play in a little bit as well to the solo once we kick that back up too.
I love that so much. I love your, diving into the lore and using things that are already there to, craft this new narrative. So I was wondering, with a character like Wanda, Scarlet Witch, who has been involved with some of the biggest events in Marvel history. I mean, House of M, shattered everything. I'm curious, you just kind of mentioned some, and obviously we were talking just about this 90s miniseries, but are there some other maybe lesser known arcs or lesser known Wanda or Scarlet Witch stories that you really love that, that maybe don't get as much love as, like I said, House of M and some of the other ones?
Well, I mean, the 90s mini is one of them. I mean, we've seen that Laura is coming back. That's been announced. She's going to be in the solo series, and she's going to be filling a new role within the Marvel Universe that I think is a really great fit for her. For folks who don't know, Laura is introduced in the 1990s miniseries. She's a Nexus being like Wanda. Her focus is on necromancy as opposed to probability in the 90s, and now of course we know magic and chaos as well since then. But she is sort of ironically, I would love to have confirmed if I met Dan that she was named Laura, because Laura is also the name of another famous evil twin in another franchise. And likewise, she sort of represents this sort of worst nightmare for Wanda. Like, Laura is everything Wanda, or people worry that Wanda might become, or Wanda already is. So she's going to be in there. That's drawn from the 90s mini. But it's worth checking out. I love this stuff from the 80s as well, the two different Vision and Scarlet Witch minis that she co-starred in. I think are really, really great too. And they're collected. You can get them all in a collection right now. So it's definitely worth checking those out.
Absolutely. People listening and watching this, make sure to get your homework in because you will be tested on it. I'm going to be testing you, and then Steve's going to be testing you with these new series. But also, too, again, we talked about kind of your approach of dealing with a character that has this kind of almost unlimited power with the kind of things that Wanda can do. And what I really love about, at least in this recent issue, in issue 3, you kind of explore the relationship not only between Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, but of their power set and how they complement each other with the magic and the science. And I thought that was just so cool and something that it's like I knew it, but I didn't have a name for it, right? And like you like put that name to it of like how their powers kind of complement each other. So can you just kind of talk about, using their powers to complement each other and using that to drive the narrative forward as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get right down to it, it's Wanda and Pietro by virtue of symbolizing science and magic, and sort of drawing quote unquote on that. They're when you connect that to the Nexus being lore and the idea that they sort of like, Wanda had, well, I forget what's been printed or not, but suffice to say, Nexus beings
Mhm.
are very important to the future and the timeline and things like that, to the multiverse. And at the end of the day, science and magic are the two ways that we as a species have always tried to explain the unexplained.
Mhm.
Like you see something that you don't understand, even going back to like the sun. What is that thing? And we usually turn to magic first. It's God, it's supernatural. And then, later on, we explain that same thing in a different way through science, which of course seems to be factually based. But either one is how we as a species confront the unknown. So, Wanda and Pietro summarizing those two things, I mean, they're protecting and symbolizing the way all of us interact with the world, with reality and all those things. Um, and likewise, there's nothing those two things can't explain. Uh, as in the case of science, maybe they can't explain it yet, but the time is coming in theory. The time is always coming. So really, for these characters who can quote unquote, as you said, have this grand power scale, can quote, achieve the impossible. Um, well, to me, that was just a logical through line. If they're doing the impossible, if they're making the impossible possible, that's kind of what we've always used science and magic for. So it just felt sort of natural to me. And magic, you can call it the supernatural, you can call it any number of things, but they're both ways to wrangle the impossible and comprehend how it could be possible. So with these characters who are miracle workers, that just felt like the natural fit for me.
You kind of touched on this already and leading perfectly into this question. And when you were speaking about lore and how she's, kind of what people think Wanda is or Wanda could be. And I feel like Wanda as a character is sort of like that in real life as well. And I think a lot of people, especially general public who maybe, are fans of the MCU and stuff like that, have like very different ideas of who Wanda is and who the Scarlet Witch is. And something again that I really love about your series and I love about the book is Wanda in the book feels very real and very relatable. And like again, while I may not be like an expert on the character, it like feels like Wanda to me, right? So I was curious for you when you started this series. Obviously, you've been in it for a while now and you have that voice in your head, but what are some of the key aspects of Wanda to you that you really wanted to add to her voice in this series and, as we go forward?
I mean, one of the big ones that I think we talked about before, but that is key, is that she's imperfect. For all this power, she's highly fallible. She's susceptible to the same ups and downs and stumbling blocks that we are as people, even though we are as severely limited in power compared to someone like the Scarlet Witch. Um, so, the and when I say imperfect, that expresses itself in a lot of different ways. She certainly makes mistakes. She overreacts. She reacts. She overcompensates. And you've seen that in the series, right? After all the decades of real time and who knows how long of comics time that she's spent, uh, being dragged down by her mistakes. Things like the House of M, as you said. Things like Avengers Disassembled. Um, even her connection to Cthulhu earlier on. These are things that we closed the book on for at least a while in Darkhold and in Trial of Magneto. But now Wanda's almost toxically confident, for lack of a better phrase. She's so worried about making people think that she's fine, that everything is great, that maybe she maybe doesn't listen to people who she should. She assumes she's always right when nobody is always right. And so and we are allowing her to make those mistakes. You've seen that sort of come back to bite her in the ass in the miniseries, where issue 3, I believe, is when Vision has this sort of pressure valve talk, and you see how she hasn't been doing what she said, because she hasn't learned it yet. She thinks transmuting Cthulhu and managing him means just constantly bottling him up and never finding an outlet for not just him, because she's not really channeling, she's caging Cthulhu, but what she's channeling isn't just him. It's the infinite nightmares of the Darkhold. I mean, there's a horrific supernatural nightmare story in that book for every single person that's lived and every single person that could or might. So I mean, she's every day she's containing essentially as the wizard says, a googleplex of nightmares inside her soul. And she thinks that being okay means never letting that out, and it takes someone else to say, well, no, that's not what it is. Managing is finding a strong outlet, and she's made that mistake. You've seen her become sort of reap that when it finally becomes too much in Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. But if you read the first 10 issues of the solo, you'd think that she thinks she's fine, and for a moment she is, but we all reach a moment where we can't just bottle things down. We can't just, hold things in. And again, for us, it doesn't normally express itself like it does for Wanda, but the parallel continues. So the thing about Wanda for me, it's not like there's specific things. I mean, she is forgiving to those who she deems worthy of it. She's compassionate. But she can also be extremely protective. She can also be irrational at times when it comes to her family. But again, that's like us. So the key isn't necessarily for me one specific thing, other than I think that she is allowed to have what is often a less perfect and more human reaction to a given event. And I think that's really special. We tell it through the comic book lens, which is big explosions and all those things. But at the end of the day, she's oftentimes, I think, reacting much more like we would. Like sometimes she doesn't take the high road, and that's okay, or it's okay for the story. It may not be okay within the story, but that's it's our job to unpack that.
100%. And again, I think all of what you just said just goes to, again, that feeling of her being real and so relatable in this series. And my last question about Wanda and Quicksilver before we move on to Scale Trade is, so again, we've been going over her powers and, Quicksilver, how they relate to each other. And we've seen Wanda pair up with a bunch of different kind of sorcerers. We've seen, obviously, we just had a whole movie of her and Doctor Strange. So I was curious, is there any putting IP and all that aside, all those, the business, nuances aside, what would be like a cool sorcerer or, other wizard you would love to see Wanda teaming up with or facing it off against?
I mean, it's funny. My mind immediately went to Gandalf because I like Gandalf, and I myself have perhaps a toxic messiah complex, and that I find him to be the most relatable character in Lord of the Rings, despite being effectively an angel who can't die permanently.
Yes, we need to have some Gandalf talk on our next conversation.
But that being said, I think there actually is a strong character dynamic between them. Like if you get past the fan thing. He too has died and come back kind of as a different person. I mean, technically Gandalf the White is a different person than Gandalf. And he also, I mean, much like Wanda, he's dealt with being an instrument for powers even greater than him, in the case of Gandalf, it's Eru Ilúvatar, and not who you'll see in the solo series. Is
almost got you there. I almost got you.
Well, I mean, Wanda's patron is revealed in the solo series, but I would also point out that it's not that much of a spoiler because the covers have been revealed, and that's all I'll say. But so I think that there's an interesting dynamic there outside of the fun, and it would just be fun to see Wanda and Gandalf like smash some vestige of Morgoth or something. And but that would be a difference too. I mean, Gandalf does still sort of play by the cosmic rules. I would argue in a Lord of the Rings type setting, if Wanda knew that Sauron was there, and especially if Morgoth was backing Sauron, she wouldn't be satisfied with him like, hanging out behind the gates of darkness. She would walk in there and nuke him.
Yeah,
Uh,
easily.
so, I think a lot about like I used to really like the Spectre. I still love the Spectre,
Mhm.
but I love the contrast at DC where you had like, Morpheus goes to hell and he has to play like the idea game or whatever it is with Lucifer and sort of outwit them. And around the same time, you had the Spectre going to hell, and in that run, which if folks haven't read the Ostrander Mandrake Spectre, it's incredible. It's a Vertigo book and everything, but it's amazing. But it's always just been a fun contrast for me because instead of like playing the Lucifer's games and things, Spectre just rips the doors off hell and walks in and demands to be heard. And that's much more Wanda. If she's
Mhm.
pissed off, I mean, she's going to be heard. So I think there's an interesting dynamic there. Um, he's not a magic person, but I think that it'd be interesting as well to pair her up against Dr. Manhattan, not in a fight. I mean, from
Ooh.
a point. But once again, like if you people like, contrary to the some people's perceptions of power, which are often very reductive. I think there's a really good contrast with Manhattan that Wanda would understand. His famously, I mean, he contends with that in that book where people assume he can just do anything and do whatever he wants. But famously, he says that everybody's a puppet, and so is he. He's just a puppet who can see the strings.
Mm.
Um, and there's an aspect of that to Wanda as well. She understands that power doesn't always necessarily mean agency, for example. Although once again, that's very different. As a nexus being, Wanda has true free will, and well, you'll see how that plays into her life as the solo goes forward. But it's a pretty powerful thing. So I like that question. I could go on because I'm a weirdo, but I
Hey,
mean. And hell, if Wanda went to Middle Earth, she could maybe find a purpose for the two blue wizards that don't do anything in that book.
yes, thank you, dude. The blue dude, everyone forgets about the blue wizards, man. They're out
I
there.
mean, my real favorite character is actually Tom Bombadil, but
Oh yeah.
then it would just be Wanda debating who he is and what he stands for.
That would be a great, like, just like single issue, just like her running into Tom Bombadil and just, having some tea.
Well, actually, I mean, this is a different podcast, but I do actually love that character because it puts everything into perspective in a way that is very interesting. Like even
Mhm.
in with all of Middle Earth in danger and all these things, with a high enough look for beings that are high enough up in the sky, so to speak, those things aren't necessarily important. And I mean, like it's a fun character and it's aggravating for some, but I love when he puts the ring on and it doesn't do anything. And he
Mhm.
basically says, they basically say, well, we can't leave it with him because he gives so little of a shit, he would just lose it.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not a joke. I actually think it's an interesting perspective, right? Like we
Yeah.
talk about that a lot. Actually, well, I don't know if it's an issue that came out or not yet, uh, but it's not a spoiler per se. But Vision says either in this issue or the next, um, on a long enough scale, there kind of is no winning. There kind of is no saving anyone. Like that's what Wanda saw in her vision. That's what the wizard is talking about to bring it
Mhm.
back around. We think superheroes save people, but it's all relative to our point of view. The planet's going to get eaten by the sun eventually. So what's the point? And no
Yeah.
one's saving it from that. And even if it did, the sun would die. So with a grand enough scale, the very idea of saving someone is almost fanciful. Um, and that's something that was overwhelming for the wizard, and it was haunting for Wanda. And you'll see how Vision reacts to it I think in the next issue. But
Mhm.
in a way, that's kind of what Tom Bombadil is saying.
Yeah.
Like he'll still be around no
Mhm.
matter what happens. And so he's kind of just not interested. Anyway, that's a big digression, but it did bring it
Yeah.
around to sort of the wizard's philosophy of the end and why it's important.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, if we had the time, I know you're busy, but if we had the time, I could sit here and talk to you about Tom Bombadil and all sort of Lord of the Rings stuff all day. Wanda versus Morgoth would be freaking crazy, dude.
Well, I
That
mean, listen, I mean, this is a Thor podcast, I assume generally, but if you read Spider-Man 2099 or
mm,
Marauders, you know that I introduced a character named Tulkas. So I think you know who my favorite.
okay.
I forget what level of the gods they are. I mean, they're right under Iluvatar and they're above the wizards, but I forget what their name. Are they
The
the Magi?
Valar.
Yeah, yeah. You could say anything. I don't remember, but I just specifically like. I always loved Telkis in Lord of the Rings because his only role, he was actually kind of similar to Bombadil in a way. Like he just wanted to party and fuck and drink and have a great
Mhm.
time. But then when Morgoth got too rowdy, his job was to go and beat him up again.
Yep.
And I've always liked that. He like probably doesn't even know how to like screw in a light bulb metaphorically, like not that gods have to do that, but he's basically like the Ash Williams of cosmologies. He's only good at one thing, beating
Mhm.
up Morgoth, and then he's
Then he just
a
yeah.
buffoon.
uh,
But I've loved that character, and that's why I created that 2099 mutant. So there you go.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I never thought that that question was going to open up so many avenues, but I love that it did. And like I said, I wish we could explore all of them. But not unfortunately, because I love this book, but we have to move on to Scale Trade. And dude, this book, awesome. I loved this first issue.
Oh,
I
thank
thought it was so fun. We talked about it just very briefly in our last conversation, but I just thought it was so cool how like so to set up everyone up who maybe didn't get to pick up the first issue last Wednesday. So in this book, dragons exist, and it's basically just like in our real world, not necessarily like with elves and all that stuff, but just like our world and dragons are there. And it follows two cops that work for sort of like a dragon agency, and they're working to try and save the dragons from extinction and put a stop to the black market scale trade, which is where we get the name of the book. And so, again, I just really thought this book was not only fun and creative, but also I noticed that we're talking about some really, I don't want to say like, I mean, yeah, heavy stuff here. And like, I thought it was also kind of a interesting look at again our real world and humanity as we interact with other species in the world. Where did this idea originally come from? Obviously you wanted to kind of hit this fantasy route, but where did the idea come from to mix fantasy with this kind of pop detective angle? And also what did you kind of want to do to make it unique in the sense of, again, like we have dragons, but like we don't see like goblins and like elves and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, so the inspiration was actually about 3 years ago. I read an article in Bloomberg about a real person who's called the horse meat vigilante,
Oh
and
god.
but it's exactly what it sounds like. He runs undercover stings on the horse meat trade in the real world. You know, this is
Hmm.
a thing. Um, and I was sort of taken by it because I mean, the passion is there, and yeah, the cruelty to animals is one of the basest, things we can do. It's abhorrent. I mean, to anything that has, a lesser agency than us. So, but also this is, even back then, 2021, and this is comics. The fact is that sometimes to get people to care, you have to, people have an easier time caring about something that's allegorical than something that's real. Look at all the racists that are X-Men fans somehow. And that, not, by the way, before people blow up, I'm not saying that all X-Men fans or even a majority are racist, but many people don't seem to understand that they're reading a book about oppressed minorities through
Yeah.
allegory, and they're missing the point. That's all I'm saying before the world blows up to me. And it is sometimes shocking. Uh,
Hmm.
people have an easier time caring. Better to say that people have an easier time caring about a fictional mutant cause than real marginalized folks' causes in the real world. That's the better way to say it. and don't even maybe realize that they're reading about an allegory for marginalized people, which will always be shocking to me, but the proof is sometimes in the comment sections.
Dude, yeah, go
Um,
to any comment about X-Men or the new X-Men 97 show and you'll see exactly what we're talking about.
Well, that's really what yeah, I need to button up before someone takes me out of context. But like this is yes, like if you're watching X-Men and saying it suddenly went woke, like this is what I'm talking about. Like it has been an allegory for marginalized struggles from day one.
Hmm.
So that's all I'm saying. So with that in mind, you know, we thought about doing a book about just, you know, the horse meat Avenger, the horse meat vigilante, but we gambled that if we infuse just enough of the fantastic, it would actually be easier for people to engage,
Hmm.
feel the pain of losing this wonder, you know, like of these creatures. So that's where the idea of sort of integrating dragons into this world came from. And once we brought Megan on, which is very early, the idea that they could hybridize, and that's kind of what made them special. I mean, came both
Hmm.
from a story standpoint and why purebreds would be prized so much, but also from a this lets Megan draw whatever kind of wild hybrid she wants standpoint, and that's been great too. We actually got a cover, I think it was from Dave McKeag, which has like a tiny snail dragon hybrid on it. And I was like
Oh.
super happy. There's like a little, it's like fighting a little escargot fork, and I was just like, this is amazing. So yeah, I mean, we sometimes you need to break reality to break away from reality to pass along a very powerful message about reality, and that's you know, with that being said, through the medium of an action adventure story that
Mhm.
is exciting no matter what, and that's how Trade came about.
Oh, I love that so much. And again, that's really kind of what I got from this, at least first issue for sure, is again, it's fantasy, but it's bringing fantasy into kind of our, you know, oftentimes bleak reality. And especially again, like how we interact with other species on our planet and how we interact with the world around us. And there was something, a line in the first issue I really loved when the two cops are talking to the waitress and the one cop mentions like how dragons actually don't breathe fire. Like that's like just kind of a myth that people believe. And he says like, oh, it's a lot easier for people to turn their eye uh, to something that they think is dangerous than to actually see what's going on. I'm paraphrasing here. You say you wrote it a lot more beautifully than I'm saying it. But again, I
It's
think
true
that
though. I mean, look at the
yeah,
bullshit about pit bulls. Like right
yeah,
now, I mean,
exactly.
it's not hard to find. As
Hmm.
if they're, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, yes, of course they're very muscular and things, but I mean, they're amazing dogs. And if they are unsafe, it's often on the fault of the trainer. It's not their
Hmm.
fault.
Oh, dude,
But
I
we
have
have,
a Belgian Malinois, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
you know, but it's the narrative, like you
Yeah.
said. Um,
Going off of that, can you touch a little bit about using these sort of real life issues as reflections in your work to kind of have this conversation with your readers?
Well, I mean, in a way, that's what we're always doing, right?
Hmm.
I mean, like it plays out in this book in one way, but we are always putting real life perspectives and ideas into the work. I mean, that's always been the case. Again, I mean, you could go back to X-Men once again.
Yeah.
Like you know, like that has the strongest concepts are tied, even if it's allegorically, to reality. And it's why I think another sort of buzz phrase that people like to use is funny, where people say like, "Oh, you know, um, oh, X character is a self-insert." You know, well, first of all, like if you think that's the bad thing, I hope you don't like Sandman because Morpheus is quite literally just Neil Gaiman.
Yeah. I
Uh,
hope you don't like the thing from Fantastic Four.
but even beyond that, like our job as writers is to put our experiences, even if it's through a lens, into a book. It's to put
Mhm.
what we see in reality, even if it's through a lens, into a book. This is why when you're a young creator, myself included, my mentors said, like, you know, I was like 18, I was sure I was ready to get into this business. And they said, well, you know, go live and do things so you have something to say.
Mhm.
You know, otherwise, what are you writing about? You're writing about secondhand experiences you've read and things like that. You have to have life experience and live life to write and have a perspective. So it's kind of always happening. But this is, you know, I mean, I write about things that are important to me, and I mean, yes, I mean, and dog rescue is important to me. I have a rescue dog myself. He's an old grumpy bastard now, but he was one. And and I think we can't let people. You have to excite people and thrill them, and that's how you get them to engage. Like if things feel too pedantic, or condescending, um, you know, they're going to feel like they're reading a news article or they're reading a Wikipedia article or something. So the hope is that you love this story because it's a story about a guy who really loves dragons and wants to protect them. If you empathize with the greater narrative after that, that's great. I think that, and I do think that's needed. I mean, we sort of turn those Sarah McLaughlin ASPCA ads into like jokes now, and I do too. But that doesn't mean that the cause isn't important,
Yeah.
even if their marketing is kind of turned into self-parody to an extent. But that's how things feel tangible, and it's kind of like I said, it's kind of always been that way, at least since the Silver Age. I mean, look, I mean, the Peter Parker model, the reason Spider-Man was so popular is because he had problems just like the readers, back then. I mean, of course, now other characters have been remolded to fit that paradigm. But back then, when I mean the classic, perhaps the classic Marvel character was so big because it was like, oh, he's not a billionaire philanthropist who's dating Vicky Vale and all these things. He's not, a conventionally hot doctor who transforms into a god, if you want to bring it around to your background.
Yeah.
He's a weird nerd that, can't get the girl and can barely make rent. And even though he has all this wild life. So the grounding things in reality, or at least with the details of reality, fashioning them, using that as an armature, that's kind of always been the model. It's always been the Marvel model, but it's also just the model of modern storytelling to make these things matter and give them weight. I mean, look, you bring it all the way around to the reasons you said you related to Wanda. It wasn't because she can look at the moon and turn it into a cake, you know.
I wish I could do that, but
It's a lot of cake, man.
you would not see me for a while.
And look, I mean, even to bring it around, joking aside, I took a shot at Thor, but to be clear, like the whole original thrust of Thor was him learning humility, which is part and parcel of saying learning to be more human.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of it's in everything that we do, but it is also a pleasure in something like Scale Trade to be able to, make characters again. Nobody like Carmen Tritos, the lead, is I would say a good person, but again, he's not a perfect person. Clearly, he's got some anger for people who read the first issue. And I also just, his partner is a jaded scumbag, and I also am a jaded scumbag. So it's pleasing to put them in the book.
Dude, you cooked that answer, man. I gotta say, if I had the means here to give you the air horns in the chat, I would. I love that so much. And I hate when people say like, oh, you hear people say, oh, these writers need to just write the character, get their paycheck, and go home. You know what I mean? Stop putting yourself into these characters. I hate that shit so much because for all the reasons you just said, like that's where all these characters came from. That's where every story you've written has a piece of that creator in it, whether inadvertently or not.
Yeah, I mean, as you said about the thing, like the reality is usually twofold. I mean, they don't really have an understanding of what writing is, and they are probably understudied. I'm not going to say they haven't read comics, but they probably haven't thought about them the same way because the stories and the people and the lives being put in the books more closely resembled theirs. I mean, you're right. For example, you're right about the thing. You're right about the thing. But I mean, you go back even further. I mean, Captain America was created by two Jews who were essentially angry America wouldn't get off our ass and join World War II. Captain America was in World War II before the real country of America, and he was created by Simon and Kirby. So, like, don't tell me that, you don't want people to put themselves, because they were literally working out their frustrations with the world through that character.
Yeah.
But if Captain America looks like you and is doing things you want him to, for example, it's easy to not see that because you're being spoken to,
Yeah,
easy
100%.
So I don't really get angry about that. I mean, it's not worth my energy, but I do, what I do is hope that people sort of learn more about I mean, the greater history of the business, or not even the business, but of what comics, and if you want to keep with superheroes, like what those have always been.
Hmm.
It's I just like I think sometimes it does come from a bad place. Other times I think it comes just from an uninformed place, and that's not a
Yeah.
crime. But educate yourself. The self-insert thing I just laugh at because again, like arguably one of the greatest comics ever written, uh, one of the only to win like a mainstream fiction award, if because we're talking about Sandman,
Yeah.
as one of the most has and this is not I'm not denigrating it, but it has one of the most obvious self-inserts in the history of the business. Uh,
Literally.
short of Jack creating Funky Flashman, who was just, I mean,
I
it was
was,
just,
yeah, Funky Flashman, dude.
but
That's
that's
like,
not a self-insert. That's an enemy insert. So,
yeah, dude, that
that's
was like the rap beef. That was the Kendrick Lamar Drake of the comic world back then. Funky
well,
Flashman.
I actually forgot that there was a dig at Roy Thomas in there too. I forgot that Funky Flashman's butler was named House Roy.
Oh
Uh,
shit, dude, you just blew my mind with that. The layers keep continue to unravel.
and listen, I love Funky Flashman. I think that shit is shady as hell. And if we were allowed to do that today, all my characters would just be dunking on one of my good friends, Frank Barberi, but he can take it.
I love that. We need to bring back the comic beefs. All in fun though, not serious ones. But with scale trade, I wanted to ask you too about the dragons that we see in this book. It seems like the dragons themselves isn't really like the main focus. It's like what's happening to the dragons. But we see, and you already mentioned this, but we see in this book that dragons can kind of reproduce with basically any, creature. And we see like a big sort of whale one. You just mentioned the kind of snail one for the cover of a future issue. So, and also, we also mentioned how they don't breathe fire. That's like a just kind of myth that people believe. So I thought that was super cool. And I was wondering, what are some other kind of aspects about these dragons in this book did you want to incorporate to sort of differentiate yourself from other, again, like your typical, Dungeons and Dragons, fantasy dragons? I'm sure that you wanted to make these a little unique in some ways. Again, going back to the hybrid stuff and the, not breathing fire. Were there any other elements that you really wanted to implement to make these dragons feel different?
There's some stuff that was on the cutting room floor that might show up in another book, but it felt actually like a little too fantasy for me.
Mhm.
And I know that's absurd to say because this is a book, but the idea was we wanted to really present them as if they had been part of the ecosystem,
Mhm.
going back. So there were actually, it's not that there were things that, I mean, if anything, like we got everything in we wanted to, and then there were some things that I personally thought, well, this is for a different book, right? This is a little Lord of the Rings. It's a little whatever. Um, as far as the actual like hybrids themselves, um, if there's a specific thing I'm like jonesing for, I usually put it in, but that's also an aspect. The real answer is that that's collaboration. When it doesn't, if I just need a hybrid for a shot, um, Megan is my equal in this book,
Mhm.
and so in my opinion, the best thing to do is note that she should pick the ones that are most exciting for her. Like if it's very important that it's for to say be like a chimpanzee dragon hybrid or something, then I'll note
Mhm.
it. But otherwise, you get the best stuff out of your creative collaborators if you give them room to cut loose. So there's actually, I mean, my mandate on the story side is to really try to treat them like they're true, like zoological creatures with a history of science and things like that. But as to picking the individual ones, unless it's specifically germane to what's going on in the story, that's my time to actually step aside and let my co-creator, who obviously is amazing at her job, lean in and do what's most exciting, and the readers benefit when that happens.
Oh, I love that. And shout out to her as well. The art in this book is absolutely awesome. I loved it. And we love talking about here, the power of collaboration, and exactly like you just said, trusting your collaborators always results in the best work possible. And again, everyone listening and watching this, go pick up Scale Trade. First issue is out. Do we have a number on the series of this as of yet, or is it kind of open to the want of the people?
I mean, it's comics. Everything is open, even if there was a number. But
Mhm.
I can tell you, we already know what our second arc would be if the first arc sells well enough. So hopefully this continues. We did hear places were selling out our over free comic book day this past weekend, so that's a very good sign.
Yes.
But we do definitely. we're talking about covers, and we realized that we in brainstorming them, we realized what our next arc would have to be, which would be a maritime arc, actually. So stay tuned on that.
Stay tuned, people. Like I said, go run to your comic shop, go pick up Scale Trade issue 1. It is fantastic. I absolutely loved it. I cannot wait to see more of the series. So again, run to the comic shop, go pick that up because we need more of it. I need more of it. And again, with Free Comic Book Day, I also want to shout out Magma Comics. Go also pick up Silicone Bandits. Go pick up Principles of Necromancy from Jackson Lance and Colin Kelly. All great books, amazing rollout for the publisher. And before we get out of here, again, pick up Scale Trade. I will say it a million more times. But before we get out of here, I got to ask, I hear that you're doing an anthology series over at Boom Studios, dipping your toes into some horror stories. So I wanted to ask you if you can tell us anything about that before we get out of here, and also any other future projects you got going on.
There's always stuff in the future. As far as oh Jesus, Boom, not Magma. So I'm coming over to Hello Darkness. I'm working with A.L. Kaplan, who first time I've ever worked with him. Very, very exciting. And the horror story for me is I've been telling people that it's David Cronenberg and it's Nikolai Gogol. And so it's a little absurdist, but it's also sort of repulsive body horror. I can tell you, like, for folks, I mean, if folks haven't read Gogol's short The Nose, it's a great piece of Russian sociological satire. um this story, it's short, like these are all shorts, they're like 6 pages long. This story is called The Foster. And it's set in a world where you can foster body parts so that they're viable longer before transplant, is what I'll say. So
Okay.
it stars a guy who's desperate for social clout and desperate to be seen as a good person. And so he volunteers to be a foster for this hand, which gets attached to his abdomen. But unfortunately, quickly comes to realize that people still don't want to talk about him. They just want to talk about the hand. So it's actually, and you'll see how that plays out. But very inspired by The Nose, where a man loses his nose and that nose ends up running for local government. But also the
I love
Cronenberg,
it.
because this is where, this is a story about a guy who has a still living human hand sewn to his abdomen.
I love it. I'm already sold with that premise. So do we have a date on that, or is that in the works?
We definitely do not have a date on it because we're still in production right now, but I'm sure it'll be coming soon. They just announced like last week. So if the normal cycle follows, you will probably see that solicited within the next 2 months. Solicited,
Beautiful.
so probably coming out towards the fall. And listen, it's spooky. If I had to guess, I'm gonna say September, October.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty safe bet. But everyone keep an eye out for that. You know that I will be running and picking that up. You should too. And we will also be covering that as more news comes out about that. So keep on watching for that, and we'll be sure to update you on that. And
Oh, and I forgot too. You asked about other things. Annihilation 2099, which got announced. So we are doing. I got to do the short version of it, but in January we did Spider-Man, Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, and that was 5 one-shots introducing the sort of 2099 versions of Marvel horror classics. And so with Annihilation 2099, including Dracula in the case of the horror characters, with Annihilation 2099, we're doing a similar thing with one-shots that establish a lot of the Marvel cosmic classics, but for 2099. So there's going to be a new Star-Lord. There's going to be a Nova 2099. There's going to be a Silver Surfer 2099. There's going to be a Red Hulk 2099. And then Dracula is coming back, which will sort of tie everything together. I mean, coming back, he's already in 2099 as of January, but he's getting another issue that'll sort of tie everything together and maybe hint at what could be next. So I'm very excited about that. And I'll tell you, like, it's hard for me to pick which of these are my favorite. The Nova issue is like a space western. The Star-Lord issue, she's interstellar security. You'll see what that means in the book. She's from planet Wakanda. Like I love the design. I love that issue. Silver Surfer is like a cosmic Faust type story. So Mephisto is sort of the big bad instead of Galactus. And I mean, Red Hulk, I hesitate to say much, but I will say that the challenge was to create a Hulk that was not really related to Gamma stuff at all. And we did, and it ended up being like cosmic survival horror. And it's really, really cool. Pete Woods drew that, and it looks really, really great. So folks should check that out. I mean, like it's going to be a great run. And then, as I said, there might be something a little teased at the end. So we'll see.
Dude, how you gonna just end off the interview dropping a bomb like that? Holy cripes! I am so excited for that. That sounds amazing.
Well, we got to figure out Thor at some point, right? I mean, like
Dude.
we established in Loki that most of the Asgardians are dead, but we'll see. I have to see. I mean, there was
Come
a
on,
Thor
Steve, don't
2099.
tease me now.
Well, there was a Thor 2099, and I actually loved his absurd costume, but he was part of the Alchemax's like corporate branded gods. Like he wasn't the real deal. So
Dude.
we'll have to see. We'll have to see. Who
Oh
knows what the
man.
is up to? Who knows?
Oh, dude, you are tickling my nerd nerves all in the right places. That sounds amazing. I cannot wait for that. And that's no date on that yet either.
Oh no, Annihilation is. I believe it's going to run weekly in July.
Oh,
So
weekly in July. Okay, Annihilation 2099. Oh, dude, I'm giddy over that. I'm about to do another video about that when we get off of here. Steve, my man, I cannot thank you enough for being here today. It is so much fun talking to you. I am just such a fan of your work and all the stuff you got going on, and everyone else should be too. So again, I will say it a million times. Go pick up Scale Trade. Go pick up Silver Vessels. Go pick up a Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Pick up the 2099. I'm mixing up my words because there's so much going on. You got so much to do, Steve. You're just killing it everywhere, dude. And I love it. I love seeing it. And so I'm going to throw it off to you really quickly. I know we just talked about the new books you got coming, but where can the people find you to stay up to date on all this great stuff?
sure. I mean, I'm at the Steve Orlando on Twitter, and I'm at the Steve Orlando on Instagram. So very easy to find.
Easy peasy. Everyone go follow Steve to keep up to date with all these stuff. Go pick up anything with his name on it. I guarantee you're going to love it. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Also, go head over to bcwsupplies.com and use code Sons of Mjolnir for 10% off your order of bags, boards, anything you need to collect. We have you covered. Once again, that code is Sons of Mjolnir. Steve, again, thank you so much for being here. I could not thank you enough. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week. I hope you stay hydrated. I hope all your stacks are fat. And we will see y'all next time.
Hang on this all day.